Okay, how's it going, everybody? So we're going to read another um, part of Frederick Engels here, another piece by Frederick Engels. Let's see. This is the labor movement in the United States by Frederick Engels. This is the introduction. This essay was written by Engels as the preface to the American edition of the Condition of the Working Class in England in 1844, published in New York in 1887. Florence Kelly Wisniewski was the translator. Her subsequent career and important contribution to social reforms in America are narrated in Josephine Clark Goldmark's Impatient Crusader, Florence Kelly's Life Story Urbana, University of Illinois Press, 1953. So we're going to go ahead and get into Friedrich Engels, the labor movement in the United States. And it would be interesting to learn about Florence Kelly also at some point. But anyway, I'm going to go ahead and get into this. 10 months have elapsed since, at the translator's wish, I wrote the appendix to this book. And during these 10 months, a revolution has been accomplished in American society such as any other country would have taken at least 10 years. In February 1885, American public opinion was almost unanimous on this one point, that there was no working class in the European sense of the word in America, that consequently no class struggle between workmen and capitalists, such as tore European society to pieces, was possible in the American Republic, and that, therefore, socialism was a thing of foreign importation, which could never take root in American soul. And yet, at that moment, the coming class struggle was casting its gigantic shadow before it in the strikes of the Pennsylvania coal miners and in many other trades, and especially in the preparations all over the country for the great 8-hour movement, which was to come off and did come off in the May following. That I then duly appreciated these symptoms, that I anticipated a working class movement on a national scale. My appendix shows, but no one could then foresee that in such a short time, the movement would burst out with such irresistible force, would spread with the rapidity of a prairie fire, would shake American society to its very foundations. The fact is there, stubborn and indisputable. To what an extent it had struck with terror the American ruling classes was revealed to me, in an amusing way, by American journalists who did me the honor of calling on me last summer. The new departure had put them into a state of helpless fright and perplexity. But at that time, the movement was only just on the start. There was but a series of confused and apparently disconnected upheavals of that class which, by the suppression of slavery and the rapid development of manufactures, had become the lowest stratum of American society. Before the year closed, these bewildering social convulsions began to take a definite direction. The spontaneous, instinctive movements of these vast masses of working people over a vast extent of country, the simultaneous outbursts of their common discontent with a miserable social condition, the same everywhere and due to the same causes, made them conscious of the fact that they formed a new distinct class of American society, a class of, practically speaking, more or less hereditary wage workers, proletarians. And with true American instinct, this consciousness led them at once to take the next step towards their deliverance, the formation of a political working men's party, with a platform of its own. Where was I right now? With a platform of its own, and with the conquest of the Capitol and the White House for its goal. In May, the struggle for the 8-hour working day, the troubles in Chicago, Milwaukee, etc., the attempts of the ruling class to crush the nascent uprising of labor by brute force and brutal class justice. In November, the new Labor Party organized in all great centers, and the New York, Chicago, and Milwaukee elections. May and November have hitherto reminded the American bourgeoisie only of the payment of coupons of U.S. bonds. Henceforth, May and November will remind them, too, of the dates on which the American working class presented their coupons for payment. In the European countries, it took the working class years and years before they fully realized the fact that they formed a distinct and, under the existing social conditions, a permanent class of modern society. And it took years again until this class consciousness led them to form themselves into a distinct political party, independent of and opposed to all the old political parties formed by the various sections of the ruling classes. On the more favored soil of America, where no medieval ruins bar the way, where history begins with the elements of the modern bourgeois, Society, as evolved in the 17th century, the working class passed through these two stages of its development within 10 months. But all this is but a beginning, that the laboring masses should feel their community of grievances and of interest, their solidarity as a class in opposition to all other classes, that in order to give expression and effect to this feeling, they should set in motion the political machinery provided for that purpose in every free country. That is the first step only. The next step is to find the common remedy for these common grievances and to embody it in the platform of the new Labor Party. And this, the most important and most difficult step in the movement, has yet to be taken in America. A new party must have a distinct positive platform, a platform which may vary in details as circumstances vary and as the party itself develops, but still one upon which the party for the time being is agreed, so long as such a platform has not been worked out or exists but in a rudimentary form. So long the new party, too, will have but a rudimentary existence. It may exist locally, but not yet nationally. It will be a party potentially, but not actually. That platform, whatever may be its first initial shape, must develop in a direction which may be determined beforehand. The causes that brought into existence the abyss between the working class and the capitalist class are the same in America as in Europe. The means of filling up that abyss are equally the same everywhere. Consequently, the platform of the American proletariat will, in the long run, coincide as to the ultimate end to be attained with the one which, after 60 years of dissensions and discussions, has become the adopted platform of the great mass of the European militant proletariat. It will proclaim as the ultimate end the conquest of political supremacy by the working class in order to effect the direct appropriation of all means of production, land, railways, mines, machinery, etc., by society at large, to be worked in common by all for the account and benefit of all. But in the new American party, like all political parties everywhere, by the very fact of its formation aspires to the conquest of political power, it is yet far from agreed upon what to do with that power when once attained. In New York and the other great cities of the East, the organization of the working class has proceeded upon the lines of trade societies, forming in each city a powerful central labor union. In New York, the Central Labor Union last November chose for its standard bearer Henry George, and consequently its temporary electoral platform has been largely imbued with his principles. In the great cities of the Northwest, the electoral battle was fought upon a rather indefinite labor platform, and the influence of Henry George's theories was scarcely, if at all, visible. And while in these great centers of population and of industry, the new class movement came to a political head, we find all over the country two widespread labor organizations, the Knights of Labor and the Socialist Labor Party, of which only the latter has a platform in harmony with the modern European standpoint as summarized above. Of the three more or less definite forms under which the American labor movement thus presents itself, the first, the Henry George movement in New York, is for the moment of a chiefly local significance. No doubt, New York is by far the most important city of the States. But New York is not Paris, and the United States are not France. It seems to me that Henry George platform, in its present shape, is too narrow to form the basis for anything but a local movement, or at least for a short-lived phase of the general movement. To Henry George, this expropriation of the mass of the people from the land is the great and universal cause of the splitting up of the people into rich and poor. Now, this is not quite correct historically. In Asiatic and classical antiquity, the predominant form of class oppression was slavery. That is to say, not so much the expropriation of the masses from the land as the appropriation of their persons. When in the decline of the Roman Republic, the free Italian peasants were expropriated from their farms, they formed a class of, quote, poor whites, end quote, similar to that of the southern slave states before 1861. And between slaves and poor whites, two classes equally unfit for self-emancipation, the old world went to pieces. In the Middle Ages, it was not the expropriation of the people from, but on the contrary, the expropriation to the land, which became the source of feudal oppression. The peasant retained his land, but was attached to it as a serf or villain. I think that's how you say it. It's kind of a villain. And made liable to tribute to the lord in labor and in produce. It was only at the dawn of modern times, towards the end of the 15th century, that the expropriation of the peasantry on a large scale laid the foundation for the modern class of wage workers who possess nothing but their labor power and can live only by the selling of that labor power to others. But if the expropriation from the land brought this class into existence, it was the development of capitalist production, of modern industry and agriculture on a large scale which perpetuated it, increased it, and shaped it into a distinct class with distinct interests and a distinct historical mission. All this has been fully expounded by Marx, Capital, Part 8, the so-called primitive accumulation, end quote. According to Marx, the cause of the present antagonism of the classes and of the social degradation of the working class is their expropriation from all means of production, in which the land is of course included. If Henry George declares land monopolization to be the sole cause of poverty and misery, he naturally finds the remedy in the resumption of the land by society at large. Now the socialists of the school of Marx too demand the resumption by society of the land, and not only of the land, but of all other means of production likewise. But even if we leave these out of the question, there is another difference. What is to be done with the land? Modern socialists, as represented by Marx, demand that it should be held and worked in common and for common account, and the same with all other means of social production, mines, railways, factories, etc. Henry George would confine himself to letting it out to individuals as at present, merely regulating its distribution and applying the rents for public instead of, as at present, for private purposes. What the socialists demand implies a total revolution of the whole system of social production. What Henry George demands leaves the present mode of social production untouched, and has in fact been anticipated by the extreme section of Ricardian bourgeois economists, who too demanded the confiscation of the rent of land by the state. It would of course be unfair to suppose that Henry George has said his last word once and for all, but I am bound to take his theory as I find it. The second great section of the American movement is formed by the Knights of Labor, and that seems to be the section most typical of the present state of the movement, as it is undoubtedly by far the strongest. An immense association spread over an immense extent of country in innumerable assemblies, representing all shades of individual and local opinion within the working class, the whole of them sheltered under a platform of corresponding indistinctness and held together much less by their impracticable constitution than by the instinctive feeling that the very fact of their clubbing together for their common aspiration makes them a great power in the country. A truly American paradox, nothing the most modern tendencies in the most medieval numeries, and hiding the most democratic and even rebellious spirit behind an apparent but really powerless despotism, such as the picture the Knights of Labor offer to a European observer. But if we are not arrested by mere outside whimsicalities, we cannot help seeing in this vast agglomeration an immense amount of potential energy, evolving slowly but surely into actual force. The Knights of Labor are the first national organization created by the American working class as a whole. Whatever be their origin and history, whatever their shortcomings and little absurdities, whatever their platform and their constitution, here they are, the work of practically the whole class of American wage workers, the only national bond that holds them together, that makes their strength felt to themselves, and not less to their enemies, and that fills them with the proud hope of future victories. But it would not be exact to say that the Knights of Labor are liable to development. They are constantly in full process of development and revolution, a heaving, fermenting mass of plastic material seeking the shape and form appropriate to its inherent nature. That form will be attained as surely as historical evolution has, like natural evolution, its own imminent laws. Whatever the Knights of Labor will then retain their present name or not makes no difference. But to an outsider it appears evident that here is the raw material out of which the future of the American working class movement, and along with it, the future of American society at large, has to be shaped. The third section consists of the Socialist Labor Party. This section is a party, but in name, for nowhere in America has it, up to now, been able actually to take its stand as a political party. It is, moreover, to a certain extent foreign to America, having until lately been made up almost exclusively of German immigrants, using their own language and, for the most part, little conversant with the common language of the country. But if it came from a foreign stock, it came at the same time armed with the experience earned during lost years of class struggle in Europe, and with an insight into the general conditions of working class emancipation far superior to that hitherto gained by American workingmen. This is a fortunate circumstance for the American proletarians, who thus are enabled to appropriate and to take advantage of the intellectual and moral fruits of the 40-year struggle of their European classmates, and thus to hasten on the time of their own victory. For as I said before, there cannot be any doubt that the ultimate platform of the American working class must and will be essentially the same as that now adopted by the whole militant working class of Europe, the same as that of the German-American Socialist Labor Party. Insofar, this party is called upon to play a very important part in the movement. But in order to do so, they will have to doff every remnant of their foreign garb. They will have to become out and out American. They cannot expect the Americans to come to them. They, the minority and the immigrants, must go to the It's a page to turn. There's an older book I found. Okay. They must go to the Americans, who are the vast majority in the natives, and to do that they must, above all things, learn English. The process of fusing together these various elements of the vast moving mass elements, not really discordant, but indeed mutually isolated by their various starting points, will take some time, and will not come off without a deal of friction, such as is visible at different points even now. The Knights of Labor, for instance, are here and there, in the eastern cities, locally at war with the organized trade unions. But then, the same friction exists within the Knights of Labor themselves, where there is anything but peace and harmony. These are not symptoms of decay for capitalists to crow over. They are merely signs that the innumerable host of workers, for the first time set in motion in a common direction, have as yet found out neither the adequate expression for their common interests, nor the form of organization best adapted to the struggle, nor the discipline required to ensure victory. They are as yet the first levies in mass in the Great Revolutionary War, raised and equipped locally independently, all converging to form one common army, but as yet without regular organization and common plan of campaign. The converging columns cross each other here and there, confusion, angry disputes, even threats of conflict arise. But the community of ultimate purpose in the end overcomes all minor troubles. Ere long, the struggling and squabbling battalions will be formed in a long line of battle array, presenting to the enemy a well-ordered front, ominously silent under their glittering arms, supported by bold skirmishers in front and by unshakable reserves in the rear. To bring about this result, the unification of the various independent bodies into one national labor party, with no matter how inadequate a provisional platform, provided it be a truly working-class platform, that is the next great step to be accomplished in America. To effect this, and to make that platform worthy of the cause, the Socialist Labor Party can contribute a great deal, if they will only act in the same way as the European Socialists acted at the time when they were but a small majority of the working class. That line of action was first laid down in the Communist Manifesto of 1848, in the following words. Quote, "The Communists, that was the name we took at the time, and that even now we are far from repudiating, do not form a separate party opposed to other working class parties. They have no interests separate apart from those of the proletariat as whole. Quote, they do not set up any sectarian principles of their own by which to shape and mold proletarian movement. Quote, the communists are distinguished from the other working class parties by this only. One, in the national struggles of the proletarians and of the different countries, they point out and bring to the front the common interests of the entire proletariat, independent of all nationality. Two, in the various stages of development which the struggle of the working class against the bourgeoisie has to pass through, they always and everywhere represent the interests of the movement as a whole. Quote, the communists, therefore, are on one hand practically the most advanced and resolute section of the working class parties of every country, that section which pushes forward all others. On the other hand, theoretically, they have over the great mass of the proletariat an advantage of clearly understanding the line of march, the conditions, and the ultimate general results of the proletarian movement. The communists fight for the attainment of the immediate aims, for the enforcement of the momentary interests of the working class. But in the movement of the present, they also represent and take care of the future of that movement. That is the line of action which the great founder of modern socialism, Karl Marx, and with him and I, so that's the end quote of future of that movement, end quote. That is the line of action with the great founder of modern socialism, Karl Marx, and with him I, and the socialists of all nations who worked along with us, have followed for more than 40 years, with the result that it has led to victory everywhere. and that at this moment, the mass European socialists in Germany and in France and Belgium, Holland and Switzerland and Denmark and Sweden, as well as in Spain and Portugal, are fighting as one common army under one of the same flag. So this is that was released at London, January 26, 1887. Yep. So yeah, well, thank y'all for tuning in with me. That was the labor movement in the United States by Frederick Engels. You know, Facebook, Twitter, YouTube. Hit the subscribe notification bell too. Medium and Tumblr. Hit me up there. And y'all have all those are Marxist saw. You know, Marxist saw. Y'all have a great day and do that go.